Hello, Witchtower Data Boos! Welcome back to the Vanishing Point. You're all my children now. I sound like a pirate.
Hi guys, as you can probably already tell, this isn't going to be a normal Watchtower database video. For over a year now, we've been discussing behind the scenes about expanding and covering other pop culture franchises than just the DCAU. Whether that be other DC properties, like the videos we've already done on the DCAU or the DC Universe streaming service, Marvel properties, or stuff that's completely off the wall, like horror movies. We still want to make the DCAU content, but we have other interests too, and I know I, at the very least, want to talk about something other than the same 6 or 7 cartoons sometimes. When we started discussing this, I pitched the idea for a video on a shared horror movie cinematic universe, but with it taking a while for us to get around to it, I figured, hey, I'll share the idea on Reddit in the meantime. Well, October came around this year, and I wanted to do my spooky movie marathon, so I go to Google up my post to recollect my notes, and lo and behold, a CBR writer turned it into an article back in July without even as much as the publication contacting me and offering compensation for publishing my work. Now, I don't blame the article writer. Looking at his output, it seems as though he has to have up to 3 articles a day sometimes to even keep up. And let me tell you, doing good original content takes time. So here we are. Since I'm not getting a paycheck for my work via CBR and Halloween landed on a Thursday this year, we all figured we might as well make a video so I can get that sweet ad money. Now, roll the spooky theme song.
You know, it's Halloween.
Viewer discretion is advised.
The Horrorverse, or Slasherverse? I really don't know what to call it. You can feel free to leave some cool name suggestions down there in the comments. It's been right in front of our noses for years, long before the Marvel Cinematic Universe was even a thing, and yet it's never been realized to its full potential. I'm sure some of you are wondering, shared horror cinematic universe? Are you talking about Freddy vs. Jason? Alien vs. Predator? I don't get it. What's so special here? And I mean, come on, you're on the right track, but do you really think CBR would publish an article in 2019 just to remind you that Freddy vs. Jason exists? I mean, probably. But let's be real here. Do you think I would find that to be an interesting video topic? Of course not. But for the sake of this video, hey guys, gals, and NB pals, did you know Freddy vs. Jason exists? For those of you who have been living under a rock since 2003, or those of you who skew on the younger side of our audience, back in the early 2000s, Freddy vs. Jason was a massive event. At the time, crossover films and cinematic universes weren't as largely popular as they are today with the advent of the MCU. In fact, I'm not 100% sure of this, but from my research, it seems as though before Freddy vs. Jason, the last actual crossover movie was Dollman vs. Demonic Toys in 1993. Sure, we had comic book crossover League of Extraordinary Gentlemen come to life earlier that year, but that was the only film in its franchise. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back in 2001 served to tie together plot lines from Kevin Smith's previous films like Chasing Amy and Mallrats, but those were already billed as part of Smith's New Jersey trilogy. 1998's Casper Meets Wendy introduced the film version of Casper to Wendy the Witch, but while she's a separate comic book property, she hadn't appeared in any prior films. Then there was 1994's Star Trek Generations, in which Kirk from the original series meets Picard from the Next Generation series, but that was still all within the same franchise. Freddy vs. Jason is arguably a much different case from all of those movies. Like Dollman vs. Demonic Toys a decade earlier, this was a merging of 2 completely separate film franchises. But unlike its predecessor, whose franchises only had 1 film apiece under their belt prior to crossing over, Freddy and Jason both had a large history of films. In this case, New Line Cinema was merging the continuity of 16 separate movies. For a point of comparison, Marvel's Avengers was only their 5th film, the 17th being Thor Ragnarok. Imagine had it taken Thor Ragnarok long to get to the first Avengers. As big as a deal as this was, fans had actually been expecting it for a while. In fact, talks about the project date back as far as 1987, but talks between Paramount and New Line Cinema broke down, and so we got We got Jason Takes Manhattan. Eventually, both series ended up in New Line Cinema's control, but by then, Wes Craven was already working on New Nightmare, set in a world where the Nightmare films were just that. Films. So the Friday team went on to produce Jason Goes to Hell, but this time, the audience would be given a tease of what's to come. Frustratingly enough, this was all the way back in 1993. Fans would have to wait 10 more years until they finally saw this tease pay off. During this 10-year gap, the only film to come from either series was Jason X, but we don't talk about that one. Following the release of Freddy vs. Jason, both franchises lay dormant until being rebooted in 2009 and 2010. While neither of these reboots had ties to the original continuities, the 2009 Friday film does canonically fit within the Transformers cinematic universe. However, despite the reboot signaling that this was the end for our two beloved slasher icons, this world would live to be seen again in 2006's cult classic Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon. As an independent film, Behind the Mask slipped under the radar of many moviegoers. The black comedy produced by Glen Echo Entertainment and distributed by Anchor Bay, now part of Lionsgate Home Entertainment, followed a documentary crew as they filmed the exploits of Leslie Vernon, a real-life slasher. While the film itself is fantastic of its own accord, one of the most interesting things about it is that it's set in a world where the events of many slasher franchises did occur, including specific mentions of Jason.
At Crystal Lake, a madman named Jason Voorhees has killed dozens over the past 3 decades, leaving a devastated, deserted community, fearful of his next appearance.
And Freddy.
Excuse me, sir. Hi. I was wondering if I could ask you some questions about your former neighbor, Frederick.
That's recurring Jason actor Kane Hodder going into the actual Elm Street house. Pretty cool, right? Over the course of Behind the Mask, we're introduced to Leslie's mentor, Eugene. We're told that he used to be a slasher himself, but his history is never fully explored in the film. However, here in the real world, Eugene's backstory was explained via an interview with Bloody Disgusting writer John Squires. According to script author David Stive, Eugene was intended to be one of the earliest slashers of all time, Billy from Black Christmas. Stive explained, "I can confirm that Eugene has always been Billy in my mind. Scott Wilson would be the right age for him, and it always fits for me that Eugene would have that old school nostalgia and slight professional jealousy that even though he was a pioneer in the business of fear, he never achieved the same fame or notoriety of his successors, Michael, Jason, etc." For those of you who have yet to see the movie, I'm sure it's odd that Stive mentioned Michael rather than Freddy, seeing as I just told you Freddy and Jason exist in this universe. But so does Michael Myers.
In Haddonfield, a prodigal son named Michael Myers has struck in a similar fashion on or near Halloween on at least 4 different occasions.
And it doesn't even stop there. We also get a name drop for Chucky.
You came to me to find out how guys like Mike and Chucky and Freddy do what they do, not why.
So with Behind the Mask, we're in a world where Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, and Halloween all coexist, as well as the one-off film Black Christmas. But Halloween has at least 4 different timelines. Which movies fit in this absurd make-believe world that I'm crafting? Off the top, we can immediately discredit Rob Zombie's reboot as well as the Halloween 2018, since neither existed at the time Behind the Mask was released, and both take Michael Myers down from Behind the Mask's stated 4 outings to a measly 2 incidents. As a side note, I haven't seen the 2018 film yet. Is it any good? Let me know in the comments down below. Kicking both of those to the curb, this gives us either the timeline that follows the events of Halloween 4 through 6, or the version of that world where those films never occurred and Halloween 2 was followed by Halloween Resurrection and H2O. Or H20? I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be 20 since it's the franchise's 20th anniversary, and it's not an underwater film. But H2O rolls off the tongue a little bit better. That looks like an O to me.
Halloween H2O.
Well, I could easily point out that Halloween 1 and 2 take place back to back and thus would bring our count for the H2O timeline down to only 3 incidents, but just for the sake of argument, let's turn to another franchise that we've already roped in.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
In 1998's Bride of Chucky, the remains of the titular character, Chucky, are being kept in an evidence locker in Lockport, Illinois. Wait, is he the titular character, or would the titular character be the bride of Chucky? How many times can I say titular before I get demonetized? Anyway, this place is filled to the brim with Easter eggs. We see Jason's hockey mask, Leatherface's chainsaw, Michael Myers' mask, and Freddy's glove. There's no explanation given for why any of this is here, and it's a bit of a head scratcher since out of all of the franchises represented, Halloween is the only one that even takes place in the same state as the Child Play series. All of these other slashers come from completely different states. But come on, they're slasher movies. Is this really the most confusing thing going on here? Ultimately, that's not the important part. We're here to find out just how they got Michael's mask. Looking at production timelines as we did when canceling out the Rob Zombie reboot and the 2018 requel, when Bride of Chucky was released, Halloween Resurrection was still 4 years away, and H2O had only been out a matter of months. At this point, one could assume that production had been wrapped on Bride of Chucky, and thus the Curse of Michael Myers would have been the ending point of the series. This works out fantastically, because at the end of the film's theatrical cut, Michael's mask is just left on the floor, ready for the taking. Sorry, producers cut purists, but we gotta go with the commercially released version of the film. And yeah, I understand, this gives us the objectively worst of the Halloween films, but bad movies is kind of part of the charm of slasher films. Like, just look up any of these franchises on Rotten Tomatoes. On the bright side though, we do get pre-Ant-Man Paul Rudd, and I mean, just look at him. Wait, wrong clip. Here we go.
I was only 8 years old when I saw him, but I was one of the lucky ones.
I know, he's no Busta Rhymes, but you can't deny Bobby Newport's got charm.
Bobby Newport.
I'm sure it didn't go unnoticed that I mentioned Leatherface's chainsaw was in the evidence locker as well, so of course, this means the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films are canon, right? Well, for the sake of this theory, so far we've only included franchises where the characters are confirmed to exist together, and while we have confirmation of all the other characters represented in the locker, we don't have that for Leatherface yet. Or do we? See, I skipped over another connection earlier because obviously the Michael Myers thing was more important. But we've gotta bring it back around to Leslie Vernon for a second because his name comes up in another more recent franchise that we've yet to touch.
Hey man, who's Victor Crowley?
He's nothing. Local boogeyman story about a maniac who haunts Honey Island. People just use it to keep kids away from the swamp.
You mean like a Jason Voorhees or something?
Something like that.
When I was 8, I lived in this town called Glen Echo. Our ghost story's about this man named Leslie Vernon.
That comes from the 2010 film Hatchet 2, in which we see Kane Hodder take up the role of yet another slasher antagonist? Protagonist? What do you call it when the main character is also obviously the bad guy? I guess I could have just called him a slasher. Duh. As you can tell from the short clip, this franchise has small connections to both Friday the 13th as well as fellow Anchor Bay film Behind the Mask. Elsewhere in the movie, we also see Parker O'Neill from director Adam Green's Frozen. While this isn't Disney's Frozen that we're talking about, this one is unlike most of the films on this list so far, in that it's not a slasher, but a thriller based around being stuck on a ski lift. But if you think that these pieces are the only connective tissue that the Hatchet series has to the rest of our universe, you'd be mistaken. Much like the Eugene Billy connection from earlier, Hatchet had its own hidden horror movie connection. Can you guess what it was? I'm sure you can. I was literally just talking about it.
I play essentially a continuation of my character Stretch from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Adam wrote it very deliberately, and I had the time of my life basically bringing that character into the present day. Instead of playing headbanging music, she's now doing something real, which is pursuing the legend of Victor Crowley. And she gets all mixed up with Mary Beth and her crazy stuff. And the next thing you know, we're in the swamp.
See how things are just coming full circle and fleshing themselves out? I love it! Now, the Texas Chainsaw films are another confusing franchise. The first two follow each other, then number 3 retcons out number 2, and then Next Generations comes around and muddles everything up even further. If you want a more in-depth look, I definitely suggest this video by Movie Timelines. Is it gonna come in here, or is it gonna like be the whatever? He's done a lot of horror franchise timelines, and while I have slight disagreements with a few things here and there, it's overall great work. So for the sake of staying consistent with Caroline Williams' own words, I'm going to say we're sticking with Texas Chainsaw 1 and 2. While I'm sure there may be detractors out there who will insist that in the unlikely event of a continuation of, say, the Friday the 13th films, all of this will come undone and not be considered canon, there's no denying that the world I've laid out for you so far does seem to be canon to the Hatchet franchise in the very least. In fact, Hatchet creator Adam Green recently doubled down on this in Friday the 13th the game, when he was asked to write interview tapes added to the game in 2017 that served to flesh out recurring Friday character Tommy Jarvis's story between the films. Not only did these tapes contain references to films we've already established in this universe, such as Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, and Hatchet, they also tied in Wes Craven's standalone 1989 film, Shocker.
Took me a few years, but eventually I tracked Rick Alone down in Maryville, Ohio. He was still a police officer, but apparently he had been going under the last name Pastore, his wife's maiden name. I found him too late, though. I found out that Rick had supposedly been murdered by some maniac in Maryville named Pinker.
By this point, I've given you the meat and potatoes of this universe's core, but depending on how fast and loose you want to play it, we can go even further. Circling back to Freddy vs. Jason, in the years since its release, we've learned that there had been plans for a sequel. According to the film's writers, initially the crossover would have ended with the two slashers having been drugged down to hell, where they would have met Pinhead from the Hellraiser series. And while that didn't play out in the final version of the film, there was a script written for a follow-up that would have brought in Evil Dead's Ashley J. Williams. Sadly, that script never came to the big screen. As Bruce Campbell explained in a Reddit AMA back in 2016, I'll be honest with you, I'm not real interested in crossovers. One of the main reasons why Ash vs. Jason vs. Freddy did not come to pass is because we couldn't control any other character other than Ash. That felt like a creatively bankrupt way to go. Not to mention, you're splitting the proceeds 3 ways with partners you might not want. Despite never hitting the big screen, the script eventually saw light of day in the 2-part comic series Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash and Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, The Nightmare Warriors. Much like Freddy vs. Jason before it, these books bring Ash into the fray based off some teases present in Jason Goes to Hell, the most prominent being the Necronomicon,
Klaatu, Murata,
and secondarily, the Kandarian Dagger. In fact, in a discussion with Sci-Fi just last year, Jason Goes to Hell director Adam Marcus revealed that this was meant to be more than just an Easter egg in the movie. When we were producing the movie, Bob Kurtzman and the guys at K&B said, we're gonna do the effects on the movie. So I got to go on Sam Raimi's set for Army of Darkness. I asked Bob if Sam would lend me the Necronomicon for Jason Goes to Hell. I let Bob in on my secret plan and knew I couldn't say Deadite or Evil Dead in the movie because Universal owned the rights. If I just take that prop and put it in the Voorhees house and use the Kandarian Dagger as the thing that kills Jason, what I'm doing is setting up a mythology that Jason's mom wanted her son back so badly that she made a deal with the darkness. So she reads from the Necronomicon and brings about the resurrection of her son. So now the fact that he lived at the bottom of the lake and grows 2 feet makes sense. But what does that mean for this movie universe? After all, we get no specific mention of the Evil Dead characters. Does it really have any impact on this world? Well, I think there's more to it than meets the eye. All throughout the Evil Dead series, time travel is a huge element. We see it in Evil Dead 2 when Ash gets sucked into the past, Army of Darkness when he's in a slightly different version of the past than Evil Dead 2 and he eventually returns to the present, the Army of Darkness director's cut which slings Ash about 100 years into the future.
I slept too long!
And there are even a few instances of time travel in the Ash vs. Evil Dead TV show and the film series tie-in comics. Of course, we all know that changing the past has an effect on the future.
I don't know why everyone believes that, but that isn't true.
And with the Evil Dead franchise constantly playing in the past, it only makes sense that the timeline would shift from time to time. And so we have the multiple Halloween timelines, the confusion that is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, all of the reboots, and even Sharknado. That's right. Tornadoes full of sharks exist in the same world as all of these slasher movies. Cause, you see, Stretch ends up dying in Hatchet 3. But she's alive and well in Sharknado 4.
What else do you use to battle Sharknado? You use chainsaws. Who better to define the chainsaw fight experience? Stretch from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Overall, there are so many twists and turns that this universe, or now I guess multiverse, can take. Especially when you consider the Evil Dead franchise has crossed over with Marvel Zombies, The Reanimator, Xena, Darkman, and Hack Slash, which is a comic series all about hunting down slashers that's also crossed with Hatchet and Chucky. The horror movie universe is extremely expansive, but unfortunately, since most of the rights to these franchises are owned by different studios, we probably won't be getting anything more definitive than Freddy vs. Jason for a long time coming. But hey, New Line Cinema, Universal, whoever, if you ever do buy the rights to all the other ones, give me a call. I'll help. But of course, now that I've laid out all these connections for you, I'm sure you'd like to give this universe a whirl for yourself. So with a little help from watching too many movie timelines videos, seriously, go check this guy out. I went ahead and put together a viewing order, which you can find linked below in the description. I've been watching the whole thing with my girlfriend all month, and it's been a lot of fun. We're scheduled to hit Freddy vs. Jason on Halloween, and I am really excited about it. But now it's time to bring it back around for the question of the day. Which slasher icons would you like to see get a crossover one day? Personally, I think the back and forth banter between Freddy and Ash would be a lot of fun, but as always, I'd love to hear what you have to say. So leave your thoughts down under in the Australia box. Before I go, I want to take a second to give a shout out to all of these lovely people who have helped support us on Patreon this month. Your contributions, whether they just be $1 or $5 or $50 or whatever it is you guys give us, has been really appreciated and helps us take the time to do what we've got to do to get these videos out to you guys. If you don't see your name on the list and you'd like to have it up there next time, you can go over to patreon.com/DCAU Watchtower and we'll get it on there for a contribution as low as $1. While you're over there, be sure to check out the other perks we've got, like voting in polls for upcoming video topics, or live stream hangouts, custom artwork, and there's just a lot more. As always though, I've been Mattie Washburn, this has been The Vanishing Point, and we'll continue to stay those things so long as you continue to stay you. I love you guys a lot. I gotta go. I need to move this back into my living room. That's gonna take a little bit of time. I don't know if you guys like the Brutalcore track at the end of the Metron video, but go to xbrutalcorex.bandcamp.com. It's all kind of silly. The song that's gonna be on this one is called Halloween. You don't even have to put this in, James.